Shalom, welcome to the Parsha Themes Shir. It's Parsha Shemos, starting a whole new book in the Torah, the Old Testament. So first question we're asking, where was God in the Egyptian holocaust? Now that might seem like a strange question, but why do we never hear the above question? Yet there is an abundance of people insisting there can't be a God because if he existed, he would have never let the Nazi Holocaust happen. So let's analyze this. Yes, the biblical Egyptian experience definitely qualifies as a Holocaust and genocide, even if those words weren't coined back then. Even though the total number of Jewish deaths caused by the persecution may have been lower, the fact is that a greater proportion of Jews died in Egypt. Our sages tell us only 20% eventually made it out of there, a much lower proportion than those who escaped the Nazi Holocaust. Pharaoh Yimach Shemo, may his name be blotted out, the Hitler Yimach Shemo of his day, decreed murder on thousands of Jewish babies by drowning them in the Nile, and his evil edict was executed. Other babies were even plastered into the walls of the structures the Jews were forced to build. And that was on top of the awful suffering inflicted on the Jews by the harsh slavery and forced labor in Egypt. Now it would be ridiculous to ask, where was God in the Egyptian Holocaust? Because of course the Torah describes in great detail God's intimate and intricate involvement in the events of and the saving of his special nation from that persecution. From the divine perspective, the reason for the carnage in both cases was the same. In Egypt, as in Europe in the 1920s and 30s, the Jews were fast assimilating into the host culture. God warns us in the Torah more than once of the suffering that comes from failing to listen to him and follow his commandments. In fact, there are two lengthy passages termed the Tochacha, or curses rebuke, in Vayikra chapter 26 and Devarim chapter 28 that are devoted entirely to this stark and somber message, with graphic illustrations of the terrible and terrifying calamities that will befall the Jewish people if we continue to ignore our Creator's instructions. Nevertheless, there was a positive result of the Egyptian Holocaust, that the Jews received the Torah from God at Mount Sinai very soon after the Exodus, then entered the land of Israel a while later. As the Torah clearly indicates, this had been the great divine plan all along. Very similar to it was the positive result of the Nazi Holocaust, that the modern state of Israel was created just a couple of years afterward. Common to both, great positive historical developments followed great tragedy. Thus, the Nazi Holocaust may seem more raw to us because it happened so much more recently, but essentially they were very similar in terms of causes, the persecution and suffering, and results. Just as good ultimately won out in Egypt against evil and tyranny, so too in Europe good, personified by the Allies, was ultimately victorious against evil and tyranny. It's essential to realize that God was the driving force behind not only the former, but also the latter. In fact, Hashem has enacted a similar template for all our exiles caused by our backsliding, persecution and suffering, followed by redemption. There is one major difference, that in modern times, so to speak, his salvation, though always miraculous, is nevertheless delivered through hidden miracles, in other words, nature, as what we would call nature, as opposed to the open miracles like the Egyptian plagues and splitting of the sea. This modus operandi where God hides himself, so to speak, is very apparent in the amazing story of Mordechai and Queen Esther versus the evil tyrant Haman Yimach Shemo at the time of Purim. But nonetheless, the Egyptian redemption signaled to us the basic truth that Hashem is always looking after his own people Israel, even if a firm hand is often required to bring us back on course. But so let's please stop kidding ourselves by offering nonsensical excuses for our anti-Torah views and lifestyles. Now, the second theme, Jewish star quality. Ve'ele shemos b'nei Yisrael, and these are the names of the children of Israel who were coming to Egypt: Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Rashi comments, although God had already counted them in their lifetime, he counted them again after their passing in order to make known and demonstrate his love for them. For they are likened to the stars, which he takes out and brings in by their numbers and names. As it is written in Isaiah, he takes out their hosts by number, he calls them each by name. Rashi could have simply stated that they are like the stars which he takes out and brings in by number and name. The Rashi's statement for they are likened to the stars implies that because the children of Israel possess the same quality as the stars, they are therefore counted in a like manner. So what is this star quality? Counting and calling by name emphasizes two different aspects of that which is being counted or called. Counting emphasizes the commonality of things. Wholly disparate entities cannot be included in the same count. A name, on the other hand, emphasizes the individuality of each thing. Rashi indicates this when he states, for they are likened to the stars, because stars possess both these aspects. On the one hand, they all share the fact of starhood, so to speak, and are counted precisely because each star is important. On the other hand, each star possesses unique qualities, for which reason each has its own name. So each Jew who is likened to the stars shares the essential quality of Jewishness and is truly part of God above. But in addition, each possesses qualities unique to the individual. God's love for the Jewish people thus finds expression in two ways. By counting them, he manifests his love for their collective essential Jewishness, and by calling each by name, he demonstrates his love for the unique qualities of each and every one. Now, thriving in adversity. Jews are hardened by oppression. The Pasuk states, V'cha asher ya'anu Oso ken yirbe, and the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs notes the singular significance of Bnei Yisrael's growth under these unbearably harsh conditions, and how this has always been among the defining characteristics of the Jewish experience. That, no less than oppression itself, is part of what it means to be a Jew. The worse things get, in fact, the stronger we become. Jews are the people who not only survive, but thrive in adversity. Jewish history is not merely a story of Jews enduring catastrophes that might have spelled the end to less tenacious groups. Rather, it is that after every disaster, Jews renewed themselves. They discovered some hitherto hidden reservoir of spirit that fueled new forms of collective self-expression as the carriers of God's message to the world. And ultimately, we can feel confident that just as Pharaoh was defeated, so will today's enemies of the Jewish people also meet their downfall, whereas the Jewish people will go on undefeated. Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, Kol ha-ben ha-yilod, every son that is born you shall throw into the river. He imposed the same decree upon his own people. Said Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Hanina, he made 3 decrees. First, he instructed the midwives, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. Then he commanded, every Hebrew son that is born you shall throw into the river. And finally, Pharaoh commanded all his people, imposing the same decree upon his own people. For that time which his astrologers had predicted, the Hebrew Redeemer would be born. The Pasuk states, V'chol habas techayun, every son you shall cast into the river, but every daughter you shall make live. Pharaoh did not merely allow the Jewish girls to live, he commanded techayun, make them live. Pharaoh's decree of annihilation against the Jewish people consisted of 2 parts. To throw every Jewish newborn male into the Nile and to make live every female. The boys were to be physically murdered, but the girls were to be murdered spiritually by making them live the Egyptian life, by indoctrinating them into the perverse lifestyle of Egypt. Just like the boys were to be drowned in the Nile, the girls too were to be drowned in the Nile, conceptually if not actually. The Nile, which irrigated the fields of rain-parched Egypt, was the mainstay of its economy and its most venerated god. The girls were to be raised in this cult of the river, their souls submerged in a way of life that deifies the earthly vehicle of material sustenance. In our own day, the Pharaoh instituted practice of drowning children in the Nile is still with us. There are still parents whose highest consideration in choosing a school for their children is how it will further their child's economic prospects when the time will come for him or her to enter the job market. The people of Israel survived the Egyptian exile because there were Jewish mothers who refused to comply with Pharaoh's decree to submerge their children in his river. If we are to survive the present Golus, or exile, we too must resist the dictates of the current pharaohs. We must set the spiritual and moral development of our children rather than their future earning power and careers as the aim of their education. Now, providentially, baby Moshe escapes the evil decree. So the Pasuk says, "V'tasem basuf al safas haya'or," and she, his mother, placed the basket in the rushes by the river's brink or bank. Why did she put Moshe in the river? So that Pharaoh's astrologers, and astrology back then was actually a science which worked, unlike today, his astrologers should think that he had already been thrown into the Nile, the Redeemer, and not search for him, therefore. This plan actually worked, as Pharaoh's evil decree was mitigated as a result from that day. Now, overcoming human limits. V'tera es hateva. So Pharaoh's daughter saw the basket among the rushes, and she sent her maid, termed Amata, to fetch it. Another interpretation renders the word Amata as her arm rather than her maid. Amata also means arm's length. This is to teach us that her arm was extended for many arm lengths in a miracle to enable her to reach the basket, according to Rashi. But if Moshe's basket lay beyond her reach, why did Pharaoh's daughter extend her arm? Could she possibly have anticipated the miracle that her hand would be extended for many arm lengths? There is a profound lesson here for each and every one of us. Often we are confronted with a situation that is beyond our capacity to rectify. Someone or something is crying out for our help, but there is nothing we can do. By all natural criteria, the matter is simply beyond our reach. So we resign ourselves to inactivity, reasoning that the little we can do won't change matters anyway. But Pharaoh's daughter heard a child's cry and extended her arm nevertheless. An unbridgeable distance lay between her and the basket containing the weeping infant, making her action seem utterly pointless. But because she did the maximum of what she was capable, she achieved the impossible. Because she extended her arm, God extended its reach, enabling her to save a life and raise the greatest human being ever to walk upon the face of the earth. And that's a quote from Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk. Now, reward for kindness. The Pasuk states, "V'tikra shemo Moshe min hamayim mishisihu." She called his name Moshe, as she said, "For I drew him from the water." From here you can infer how great is the reward for those who perform acts of kindness. For, although Moshe had many names, the name by which he is known throughout the Torah is the one which Bisya, the daughter of Pharaoh, called him. And even God called him by no other name, says the Midrash. Now Moshe's compassion. V'yigdal Moshe, and Moshe grew, and he went out to his brothers and looked on their suffering. He saw great burdens put upon small people and light burdens upon big people, a man's burden upon a woman and a woman's burden upon a man, the burden which an old man could carry on a youth and of a youth on an old man. So Moshe left his place and rearranged their burdens, pretending all the time to be helping Pharaoh. God then said to him, "You have put aside your affairs and have gone to share the sorrow of Israel, behaving to them like a brother. So I too will leave those on high and below and speak only with you." Moshe saw that they had no rest, So he went to Pharaoh and said, if one has a slave and he does not give him rest one day of the week, the slave dies. Said Pharaoh in response, go and do with them as you say. Thereupon Moshe ordained for them the Sabbath day for rest. Now, after acting in support of his brothers, Moshe felt his life was in danger. Vayira Moshe v'yomar achein noda hadavar. And Moshe was afraid and said, indeed, the thing, which is that he had killed an Egyptian who was severely beating a Jewish slave, that thing is now known. So Moshe was meditating in his heart, in what have Israel sinned that they should be enslaved more than all the nations? But when he heard their words of reproach for his interference in their affairs, he said, tale-bearing is rife among them, so how can they be ready for salvation? Thus he proclaimed, indeed the thing is known. Now I know the cause of their enslavement, says the Midrash. How could the entire Jewish nation deserve such brutal slavery and oppression only because of a few gossipers, though? But what Moshe meant was this. The Jewish nation was to be redeemed despite their sins, despite wallowing in the corruption, idolatry, and depravity of ancient Egypt. The redemption was due because God had chosen the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to be his holy nation. But if one Jew can speak badly of another Jew, in what way do they constitute a nation at all? So now Moshe could see some meaning in their suffering. It was a crucial part of the process. It was through the suffering that their hearts were softened. Only afterwards could they merge together as a single entity, because now the individual members deeply cared for each other and each other's welfare, and then they could be redeemed as a nation. Shepherding and leadership qualities. Moshe hayaroeh es tzon Yisro, and Moshe was shepherding the sheep of Yisro. God tests the righteous. How does he try them? With sheep, actually. He tried King David through sheep and found him to be a good shepherd. As it is written in Tehillim in Psalms, he chose also David his servant and took him from the sheepfolds. As a shepherd, David would bring the smallest sheep out first so that they should graze upon the tender grass. Then he allowed the old sheep to feed from the ordinary grass. Lastly, he brought forth the young, lusty sheep to eat the tougher grass. Whereupon God said, he who knows how to look after sheep, bestowing upon each the care it deserves, shall come and tend my people. Also, Moshe was tested by God through sheep. Our sages relate that when Moshe was tending the flock of Yisro in the wilderness, a little kid escaped from him. He ran after it until it reached a shady place. When it reached that place, there appeared in view a pool of water, and the kid stopped to drink. When Moshe approached it, he said, I did not know that you ran away because of thirst. You must be weary. So he placed the kid on his shoulder and walked back. Thereupon God said, because you were merciful in leading the flock of a mortal, you shall also tend my flock, the people of Israel. The burning bush. So Moshe fled from Egypt by way of the land of Cush, eventually arriving in Midian. At the age of 77, he married Zipporah, daughter of the local chieftain Yisro, and went to work shepherding Yisro's flocks. Yisro had denounced idolatry and was therefore ostracized by his people. In the meantime, the Jews' slavery in Egypt had intensified further, so God appeared to Moshe on Mount Sinai, speaking to him from a bush that was burning but was miraculously not consumed. The Pasuk says, V'yera Malach Hashem Elov, an angel of God appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a thorn bush. V'hasneh einenu ukol, the bush burned with fire, but the bush was not consumed, says the next pasuk. Moshe had thought to himself that the Egyptians might consume Israel, so God showed him a fire which burned but did not consume, saying to him, just as the thorn bush is burning and is not consumed, so the Egyptians will not be able to destroy Israel. But why in a thorn bush and not some other tree? So in order to demonstrate that I am with them in their affliction. That was the reason. Vayomer Moshe asur na va'era es hamara hagadol hazeh. And Moshe said, let me turn away and go over there to behold this remarkable sight. When Moshe said these words, he was voicing the aspiration that is the foundation of any relationship with God. This aspiration is what makes us human, beings that strive to rise above animal existence in search of intellectual depth and spiritual self-refinement. This ambition enables us to focus our intellect in solitary meditation and climb the ladder of divine consciousness. Whatever level of consciousness we achieve, we always aspire to ascend further. The force of this aspiration unlocks all our human potential, strengthening our intellect, emotions, and senses. We are constantly blessed with new insight and understanding, which in turn leads us toward a deeper relationship with God. Thus, as stated in the next verse, it was only after God saw that Moshe had turned aside to look that he called to him from the midst of the bush. Now, Moshe's humility. Moshe said to God, Mi anochi ki elech el paro v'chi otzi es bnei Yisrael miMitzrayim. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should take the children of Israel out of Egypt? So the pasuk says, V'yomer v'zeh lecha ha'os, and he, God, said to him, this is your sign that I have sent you. In other words, what he had just spoken about, in other words, his humility. Hashem was saying, this itself, your humility, is the entire reason why I have chosen you. That's the Mayana Shel Torah. Now Moshe's misstep, the pasuk says, V'yoma hashlichehu, and God said to him, throw your staff on the ground, and it turned into a snake. He put his hand into his bosom, and his hand was leprous like snow. God was indicating to Moshe that he acted wrongly in saying that the people of Israel would not believe that he had been sent by Hashem to redeem them. That's what Moshe claimed, but he was wrong in that claim. The snake is an allusion to the primordial serpent who was punished for his evil talk in the Garden of Eden. Tsaras, or leprosy, is the punishment for slander. Reish Lakish in the Gemara Shabbos explained, he who entertains a suspicion against the innocent will be bodily afflicted, as it is written, Moshe replied, but they will not believe me. However, it was known to the Holy One, blessed be He, that Israel would believe. He said to Moshe, they are believers, the children of believers, and this is why they deserve to be redeemed. But you, Moshe, will ultimately disbelieve. They are believers as it is written, and the people believed in Shemos. The children of believers, as it is written, and Abraham believed in the Lord. But you will ultimately disbelieve, as it is said, and the Lord said to Moshe, because you did not believe in me. That was at the waters of Meribah later on, after 40 years, where Moshe hit the rock instead of speaking to it. And that's in the book of Bamidbar. Moshe was entitled to have doubts about his own worthiness for the task, but he was not entitled to have doubts about the people, even though his doubts seemed justified since the people were fractious. We know Moshe calls them a stiff-necked people, and time and again during the wilderness years they complained, sinned, and wanted to return to Egypt. So Moshe wasn't entirely wrong in his estimate of their character. Nevertheless, God reprimanded him and punished him by making his hand leprous. A fundamental principle of Jewish leadership is intimated here for the first time. A leader does not need faith in himself, but he must have basic faith in the people he is to lead. Unless you believe in them, you cannot lead in the way a prophet must lead. You must be able to see also their underlying virtues. And as we know, Moshe was the greatest prophet who ever lived. So who is a leader? To this, the Jewish answer is one who identifies with his or her people, mindful of their faults to be sure, but convinced also of their potential greatness and their preciousness in the sight of God. Those people of whom you have doubts, said God to Moshe, are believers, the children of believers. They are my people and they are your people. Just as you believe in me, so you must believe in them. Now finally we talk about the magical staff. And you shall take this staff in your hand, with which you shall do the signs. In other words, cause the plagues of Egypt. Although obviously they were essentially caused by God, but it was by way of the staff which was carried by Moshe, or many of them. So this staff, a little bit like the story of King Arthur, which you may have heard, this staff was created at twilight of the 6th day of creation and was given to Adam in the Garden of Eden. He gave it to Enoch, Enoch to Noach, Noach to Abram, Abram to Yitzchak, Yitzchak to Yaakov, and Yaakov brought it with him to Egypt and gave it to Yosef. When Yosef died, his house was looted and the staff ended up in Pharaoh's palace. Yisro, who had been one of Pharaoh's advisors, saw the staff with the mysterious markings on it, which it was marked firstly with the name of God, and secondly with the acronym of the 10 plagues of Egypt. So he saw the staff, coveted it, and he took it and planted it in the garden of his home. That was Yisro. And no man was able to remove it. But when Moshe came to Yisro's house, he entered the garden, saw the staff, and read the markings on it. He reached out his hand and plucked it from the ground. When Yisro saw this, he proclaimed, "This man shall redeem the people of Israel from Egypt," and gave him his daughter Tzipporah as a wife. That's in Pirkei Rebbe Eliezer. So no person was able to remove the staff until Moshe came and removed it with ease. And that's the end of Parsha Shemos. And God willing, we'll be back next week with Parshas Ve'era. Until then, have a good week. Shalom.